Happy International Women's Day. Whether you are new to feminism, or you've started learning about feminism, or you don't know anything at all about feminism, this is what we're here to talk about. This video is for you. I'm here to talk about books on feminism that you can read. If you're wondering what feminism is, I'm going to open with a passage from one of the books that I'm going to talk about. And that book is Feminism is for Everybody. It's by Bell Hooks. I'm going to talk about it in a second, but I want to start by reading a piece of the introduction. It is easy for the diverse public I encounter to understand what I do as a cultural critic, to understand my passion for writing. Lots of folks want to write and do. But feminist theory, that's the place where the questions stop. Instead, I tend to hear all about the evil of feminism and the bad feminists, how they hate men, how they want to go against nature, and God, how they are all lesbians, how they are taking all the jobs and making the world hard for white men who do not stand a chance. When I ask these same folks about the feminist books or magazines they read, when I ask them about the feminist talks they have heard, about the feminist activists they know, they respond by letting me know that everything they know about feminism has come into their lives third hand, that they really have not come close enough to feminist movement to know what really happens, what it's really about. Mostly they think feminism is a bunch of angry women who want to be like men. They do not even think about feminism as being about rights, about women gaining equal rights. When I talk about the feminism I know, up close and personal, they willingly listen. Although when our conversations end, they are quick to tell me that I am different. Not like the real feminists who hate men, who are angry. And if they dare to come closer to feminism, they will see it is not how they have imagined it. Like everybody, I had preconceived notions of feminism. And like everybody, we have preconceived notions of everything, right? We are actually heavily influenced. And it's not until I became a mom. I became a young mom at the age of 24. So I gave birth right after my 24th birthday to my firstborn. So I have two kids, my son. And slowly things started to feel strange. Other than the fact that parenthood, young parenthood, or just parenthood in general, whether you're younger or older, presents this whole new shake in your life and this huge transformation. I was now faced with the question of what it meant to be a woman. What did it mean that I had gotten pregnant at an age where I never thought I would be pregnant, or where I clearly wasn't ready yet? I don't believe that I was fit to become a mother at that age. Like many mothers, I think that a lot of us transform, and you will know if you're a mom, in the most radical way possible. And the same goes for men. Same goes for new dads, mostly. That's where feminism comes in. I owe a lot to feminism, but I understood what most people understood. And I was one of those that thought that feminists were these angry women and that it was a bit too extreme. I want to wait until the bell stops tolling. A couple of generations ago, it was just widespread fact that the woman belonged to the man in the house, and that the man was patriarch, was the one that we had to listen to, that was the boss of the children and the woman, the mother, the wife, and that was it. That was that. Women didn't have the right to vote. Women didn't have the right to have their own money. Women didn't have the right to work. And in many places in the world still, women and girls are not allowed many things. So there is still a lot of injustices, and it's real. And that's why feminism exists, and that's why feminism started in the first place all those decades ago, and that the first generation feminists paved the way to modern feminism, which of course is quite different and has gone through so many different stages in history. But let me tell you a disclaimer right now. I'm not an expert at feminism at all. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a reader and a person who is curious, and I'm a mother. And as a mother, also as a mother of a little girl, I find it to be my responsibility, and not just my responsibility, but just it's nice to kind of understand the underlying currents behind behavior, behind certain discriminations. And I think that it's also a responsibility for all men and women to understand that all these things are not necessarily to be taken for granted, that everything is reversible, that each generation kind of continues the fight in its own way, whether that is a feminist battle or a battle for rights, basic human rights. It was also not so long ago that slavery was abolished. If you take the whole history of humanity and you see things from a relatively large perspective, patriarchy has been around for a couple thousand years. And it's only a few generations that as women we have rights. And those rights are not to be taken for granted and not to be taken lightly. And the people that have created the groundwork for us to have these rights are to be recognized. And one way of recognizing them is to learn about them. The books I'm going to talk about, I came upon them a bit by accident. It's so complex, and I know we don't have all the answers. And I think a lot of us are still kind of looking for these answers. In a world where gender is questioned, in a world where gender is not anymore binary, in a world where people are starting to feel more free and open, and so more free and open to be who they are, thus kind of challenging the status quo and challenging hardwired beliefs for some people. I remember when the hashtag Me Too movement broke out. It was quite revolutionary. It was crazy. It was insane, because when the Me Too movement broke out, a lot of girls, I don't remember how old I was at the time, but I was a teenager. And I remember on Facebook, when Facebook was a bit more of a thing, at least for my generation or for my group of people, that a lot of women and girls that I knew were starting to post about their kind of experiences. And a lot of them would talk about how they were groped, how they were assaulted. And of course it brought forth a lot of memories for me from the times that I was assaulted. And I was lucky enough that I didn't experience huge things. But I feel like all of us, when we started to kind of gather and talk about it, we all realized that we all experienced at least once in our life something that we shouldn't have experienced. Whether it's a guy just like jerking in front of you in a public space, even though there's not a lot of people around, which is insane, and intimidating you that way. Or for me, in my case, it was a guy that just randomly groped my ass and like just, rubbed himself against me in the crowded metro when I was 14 years old. 13 or 14 years old. And at the time I felt powerless. And these things, they affect you. There is a huge difference between walking around feeling assured, feeling unfearful, trusting about the world around you. And I think we live in a world where we've gotten so used to distrusting, which is in a way part of the human experience. But in a way, I feel like it's too much, and at some point it's just time to recognize that there's a thing there. There's a thing going on. I'm actually in Paris this week to go to the night march that a friend of mine who is an activist, feminist, is organizing. And I thought it was the perfect time to talk about these books. And I'm going to give you 4 book suggestions with a couple extra books that you can kind of expand with. I always learn something when I read these books. I'm going to present them to you in the order that I think would make the most sense in reading them, which is not necessarily the order in which I read them. So the first book I'm going to recommend, We Should All Be Feminists. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm not sure I said that right, I apologize. And this little book was great. What does feminism mean today? In this personal, eloquently argued essay, adapted from her much-admired TEDx talk of the same name, she offers readers a unique definition of feminism for the 21st century, one rooted in inclusion and awareness. Here is one remarkable author's exploration of what it means to be a woman now, and of the moment rallying cry for why we should all be feminists, which is a great title. What I love about this is that it's very, very small. It's not really even written in very big, in very small letters. It's really readable in an hour or less. I passed this on to my partner, and he read it, and he had a criticism about it. He did say that he thought that it was a bit too simplistic. I disagree, because I think that this is something that I would have needed in the beginning as well. Even if, you kind of like read it and you're like, oh, okay, of course that makes a lot of sense. It's not necessarily as if you would learn something new, but you might learn something that you've never verbalized before or was never verbalized before.
But I hope it makes you feel better to know that it's not just in Colombia. Everywhere, really, everywhere in the world. And never mind about sort of, people having feminism and T-shirts and, Beyonce's song. It's still a word that gets a lot of negativity. Right? And I cannot tell you how much of that I get in Nigeria. How constantly I'm told that people want you to shut up and write and stop talking about feminism because you're destroying marriages and you're misleading young girls and you're, that sort of thing. I think what's important is to try and get people to engage is to, and it's not so much to, because I don't want to say smile when you don't feel like smiling, because that's what women have been told for too damn long. But it's simply to say, make your case. And here's what I mean. We're enraged. We have every right to be enraged. But that person looking at you in your rage doesn't actually know why you're enraged. So make your case. And I like storytelling. I don't like theory, because I don't think people connect with theory. But I like storytelling.
This automatic thing that we do, and when I say we, I say in general society, wherein we see a couple and there's a man and a woman, and in many social circumstances, and I can attest to this because I have witnessed this firsthand, my husband or my partner will be addressed and not me. My opinion doesn't matter, right? I'm sure you've had that. I'm sure many women have had that. And it's still a reality today. And those are the kind of mechanisms that are internally sexist. And by sexist, I don't necessarily mean something negative, but it just means that it's the product of all these millennia of social conditioning. I really suggest checking out her TED Talk. And if you would rather just read this.
And so I'm learning, for example, about this vast epidemic of violence against women in this country. We need to tell the stories and to humanize those people. And most of all, I think, feminism in general needs to engage with boys and men. It's not enough to say to women, come gather together and be empowered. We have to say to men, stop raping, stop beating, right? And we have to say, it's true. And I think we need to, and it's something that we collectively have to talk about. And I don't think we talk about this enough, right? A woman cannot, by staying home at night and holding her keys in a particular way and wearing tight jeans and all of those things, that's not what's going to stop violence. It's the perpetrators that we'll be focusing on. So I think feminism has to make a lot more room for the engagement with men, of men, about men. Otherwise, we're not getting anywhere. And so the feminist boys have to get on board.
So this next book that I want to suggest is actually a book that I haven't finished yet. I'm halfway through. I brought it for the trip. Sadly, I haven't finished it yet, but I found that so far it was illuminating. It was great, and there was a lot of things that I didn't know at all. But I feel like it's a perfect book to follow up with the other book, We Should All Be Feminists. Feminism is for Everybody. It's the book that I read a passage of from the beginning. After the introductions, you have several short chapters, and that's what I love about this book, is that it's really small. But I found that it was really interesting because she has Bell Hooks has a very clear way of expressing herself and of writing, and it's really understandable, really easy to grasp, and fascinating as well.
The fact is,
this is why we love Bell Hooks.
one thing, this is something that's been on my mind lately, and it's been disturbing me, is that if feminism is all things to all people, then what is it? How do we locate it as a radical political movement in our lives if everybody just makes of it, which doesn't mean that we should demonize, but we do have to be clear about what are the boundaries. What is the line that you cross that you can in fact say, I'm a feminist. Like for me, my students will say, well, I'm anti-abortion, but I'm a feminist. And I'll say, but that is impossible, because you can say, I would never choose to have an abortion because I don't support that for myself. But there is no one who's genuinely a feminist who doesn't support reproductive rights for women. And it's so hard for us because we live in this binary world that's always saying choose one thing or the other. I don't try to get someone to choose my values about abortion, but I do feel that part of the essence of feminism is that women have control over women's bodies, that women have reproductive rights, all women. And so you can't want to take that away from somebody and then brag about how feminist you are.
She says that nobody is born a feminist, you are made a feminist. So that feminists, when they become feminists, they kind of have this phase where they confront their like inner sexism, right? And that happened for me, and I'm not gonna dwell on it or talk about it too much, but it happened for me where I had to face my internalized sexism, where I thought, you know, that was kind of like a light bulb eureka moment in my journey, at least, which happened like really recently, not so long ago, like one and a half years ago or something. A few years in after I became a mom. So you kind of like have to awaken to that. And part of that for me, for my particular person and personality, was about realizing that a lot of the things that I had done, or a lot of my behavior, was kind of, you know, shaped by this sort of inner desire that I had to please men and to kind of prove myself to men. And that's also sort of like a result of feeling like you are, and I feel like a lot of us can maybe relate to this, but that you are not credible. From its earlier inception, feminist movement was polarized. Reformist thinkers chose to emphasize gender equality. Revolutionary thinkers did not want simply to alter the existing system so that women would have more rights. We wanted to transform that system to bring an end to patriarchy and sexism. Since patriarchal mass media was not interested in the revolutionary vision, it never received attention in mainstream press. The vision of women's liberation, which captured and still holds the public imagination, was the one representing women as wanting what men had. And this was the vision that was easier to realize. Reformist feminist thinking focusing primarily on equality with men in the workforce overshadowed the original radical foundations of contemporary feminism, which called for reform as well as overall restructuring of society so that our nation would be fundamentally anti-sexist. In this book, you will learn the difference between reformist feminist and revolutionary feminism and lifestyle feminism, and I loved, like, this whole book is just about the explanation of that. And I feel like this is kind of an important stepping stone to kind of talk about people's biases in general. And again, my past biases included. She goes on to start this chapter saying, before women's studies classes, before feminist literature, individual women learned about feminism in groups. The women in those groups were the first to begin to create feminist theory, which included both an analysis of sexism, strategies for challenging patriarchy, and new models of social interaction. Everything we do in life is rooted in theory. Whether we consciously explore the reasons we have a particular perspective or take a particular action, there is also an underlying system shaping thought and practice. Everything said there. In its earlier inception, feminist theory had its primary goal explaining to women and men how sexist thinking worked and how we could challenge and change it. In those days, most of us had been socialized by parents and society to accept sexist thinking. We had not taken time to figure out the roots of our perceptions. Feminist thinking and feminist theory urged us to do that. Yeah, so I'm actually a bit sad that I haven't finished this book to talk about, but I think like it's just the perfect kind of introduction to feminism that we need, all of us. And I'm looking forward to finishing it. The next book is very dear to me. It's called Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. She is an author, an activist, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, so this essay was about a way women are severely impacted by being treated as not credible, as not people who have something to say, as people whose voices shouldn't count, whether they're saying this is what's going on, you know, in the office, or no, I don't want to have sex with you, or he's trying to kill me. It's funny because I started writing with the famous opening anecdote about a man explaining my book to me, writing what I thought was going to be a very lightweight or a very funny piece, and it got pretty quickly into rape and murder. Credibility is a basic survival issue.
And the essay became sort of like a landmark essay. So the essay that, you know, that this collection begins with is the essay titled Men Explain Things to Me. It's an essay in which Rebecca Solnit kind of confronts the fact that many men of any sort of professional background tend to explain things to women that are actually a bit more knowledgeable than them. When she actually posted this essay, it went viral. Like, thousands and thousands of women saw it, read it, loved it. It's because everyone knew what she was talking about. Everyone had had that experience. And I have had that experience firsthand, where I speak about my passion to a person that has the same passion, which, you know, if you're curious to know, is writing. And they just have no clue, and they're just telling you something. You know, I'm gonna just tell this anecdote because I have to let it out. But one day I was talking to a guy, And he was as well as a writer and someone who's passionate about writing, and read a lot and things like that, supposedly cultivated. And I one night, and of course, you know, we cannot judge anyone, but you know, he had a bit too much to drink, maybe sniffed a bit of coke, I don't know. It was a party, and I explained, like, why didn't you know, like, did you read the essay I sent you about and it was about women specifically. And he said he hadn't, and that he kind of started denigrating me and kind of like, you know, saying like, I don't do essays, like, what the fuck, you know what I mean? Like, it was super weird, and I was like, okay, you know, and he, you know, he's like this writer guy, and he's like, okay, yeah, I don't do essays, I just, you know, want to perfect, I don't know exactly what he said, but he had this kind of condescending tone, as if like essays wasn't something that people wrote, like writers wrote, you know, I mean, I don't have to tell you, James Baldwin, whoever, like so many authors write prolifically in all kind of formats and forms, and so it was just a stupid conversation. So that's what she meant. It's an even more interesting story. So the story starts with, basically, she's going to this party, and it starts quite lightheartedly. She's going to this party with another friend of hers, and there they meet a professor who is starting to explain to Rebecca Solnit, to the author, her own book. And he was like, say, you know, because he was asking her like, oh, what are you working on? And she said, well, I'm writing this book about this. And he was like, oh, I've read a book about that. You don't have to write a book about that anymore, because there's already a good book about that on the market. And he starts to talk about this book, and it was, you know, her friend that was with her was trying to interfere, like, yeah, that's her book, that you're talking about her book. And he just rambles on, and then, you know, she, in the end, says, yeah, that's my book. And I just found that amazing, and a lot of women resonated with it, and to the extent that it kind of created the term mansplaining, you know. A commenter commented on the post where the essay was first appeared, and she coined the term mansplaining, which now I think is part of the dictionary. It was now it's a term that everybody knows, and that's so funny. I want to read a few passages from Men Explain Things to Me that I had saved a while ago. Men explain things to me still, and no man has ever apologized for explaining wrongly things that I know and they don't. Girl! You and me both. Most women fight wars on two fronts. One for whatever the putative topic is, and one simply for the right to speak, to have ideas, to be acknowledged, to be in possession of facts and truths, to have value, to be a human being. Every woman knows what I'm talking about. It's the presumption that makes it hard at times for any woman in any field, that keeps women from speaking up and from being heard when they dare, that crushes young women into silence by indicating, the way harassment on the street does, that this is not their world. It trains us in self-doubt and self-limitation. It's super important. Just as it exercises men's unsupported overconfidence. And then there's this other quote about women's liberation that kind of connects the claim of these books that I'm talking about. She writes, women's liberation has often been portrayed as a movement intent on encroaching upon or taking power and privilege away from men, as though in some dismal zero-sum game, only one gender at a time could be free and powerful. Feminism is an endeavor to change something very old, widespread, and deeply rooted in many, and perhaps most, cultures around the world, innumerable institutions, and most households on earth, and in our minds where it all begins and ends. That so much change has been made in 4 or 5 decades is amazing. That everything is not permanently, definitively, irrevocably changed is not a sign of failure. A woman goes walking down a 1,000-mile road. 20 minutes after she steps forth, they proclaim that she still has 999 miles to go and will never get anywhere. So the last book I want to talk about, and oh my god, I want to read like all the passages of this book. It's Virginia Woolf. No less, obviously, A Room of One's Own and 3 Guineas. I have not read 3 Guineas, which also seems super interesting, but I think A Room of One's Own also particularly applies to those of us women that are also interested in creative life and having a creative life, and in writing in particular. Here she talks about specifically writing fiction. And it's fascinating because I remember a time several years ago where I started to read A Room of One's Own, and I did not understand much, and I thought, I don't know, I don't understand much of this, and I read it again only recently, like last week or 2 weeks ago, and I thought, oh, whoa. After having read these books, it kind of started to make sense. Well, actually, it made so much sense, and it was like a kind of a light bulb moment. I talked about this to my friend Juliet, who I'm going to see later because she organized the feminist march with her group. But she was saying that a lot of women that she knew had a similar effect when reading Virginia Woolf. Let me know if you've read Virginia Woolf and if you have had a similar effect in reading her. On top of the amazing prose, just being like the ideas are just insanely good. There are a few passages that I want to read. So she starts with basically addressing pupils, I think women in the college who want to write books. It starts with, "But you may say, we asked you to speak about women in fiction. What has that got to do with A Room of One's Own? I will try to explain. When you asked me to speak about women in fiction, I sat down on the banks of a river and began to wonder what the words meant. They might mean simply a few remarks about Fanny Burney, a few more about Jane Austen, and a tribute to the Brontes and a sketch of Haworth Parsonage under snow. Some witticisms, if possible, about Miss Mitford, a respectful allusion to George Eliot, a reference to Mrs. Gaskell, and one would have been done. But at second sight, the words seem not so simple. The title Women in Fiction might mean, and you may have meant it to mean, women and what they are like, or it might mean women and the fiction that they write, or it might mean women and the fiction that is written about them, or it might mean that somehow all three are inextricably mixed together and you want me to consider them in that light." And she does. She goes on to consider all of these things in that light. And there's a few passages that particularly struck me. She goes on to kind of research books, and she notices that there's a large amount of books about women written by men at the time. And she notices sort of anger, something that she classifies as anger in the writing of these men. And what she says about it is just brilliant. "The professors, I lumped them together thus, were angry. But why, I asked myself, having returned the books. Why, I repeated, standing under the colonnade, among the pigeons and the prehistoric canoes. Why are they angry? And asking myself this question, I strolled off to find a place for luncheon. What is the real nature of what I call for the moment their anger? I asked. Here was a puzzle that would last all the time that it takes to be served with food in a small restaurant somewhere near the British Museum." She starts to, she sits in that restaurant, she reads this journal, and she reads articles from this journal that she's holding, and then she starts to think about the journal that she's holding. She says, "The most transient visitor on this planet, I thought, who picked up this paper could not fail to be aware, even from this scattered testimony, that
England is under the rule of a patriarchy. Nobody in their senses could fail to detect the dominance of the professor. His was the power and the money and the influence. He was the proprietor of the paper and its editor and sub-editor. He was the foreign secretary and the judge. He was the cricketer. He owned the racehorses and the yachts. He was the director of the company that pays 200% to its shareholders. He left millions to charities and colleges that were ruled by himself. He suspended the film actress in mid-air. He will decide if the hair on the meat axe is human. He it is who will acquit or convict the murderer and hang him or let him go free. With the exception of the fog, he seems to control everything. Yet he was angry.
Ne restera qu'un écran de fumée tant que le gouvernement continuera sa destruction du système de santé publique, seul garant de l'accès libre et gratuit à l'IVG. Les droits des personnes LGBTQIA+, et en particulier des personnes trans, sont la cible d'offensives réactionnaires. L'autonomie des travailleuses du sexe est sans cesse remise en cause. Les personnes porteuses d'un handicap visible ou invisible continuent d'être silenciées et infantilisées. Les femmes...
So be it, I should have said. But I had been angry because he was angry. Yet it seemed absurd, I thought, turning over the evening paper, that a man with all this power should be angry. Or is anger, I wondered, somehow the familiar, the attendant sprite on power?